Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this fabulous Friday. Looking forward to a great session for this morning of Max Minutes. First, before we get started, I would like to thank all of our sponsors, WorkSource Georgia, WorkSource Metro Atlanta, Department of Human Services, Georgia or Atlanta Career Eyes, Goodwill, Metro Atlanta Chamber, BDI, and First Step Staffing. So thank you all. Without your support, we couldn't make this happen. I'm going to quickly transfer it over to Daniela, but just so you know, today, please feel free to ask questions. Lots of questions are good. Dana is ready for your questions this morning. There is going to be a little bit of a data portion. So feel free, if you've got some timely things that you want to ask, go ahead. We are go with the flow this morning for Friday. So just use the chat box or Q&A function and we'll get your questions addressed. With that, I will pass it over to Daniela. Thank you, Daniela.
Thanks so much, Amy. Really appreciate it. I'm Daniela Perry, Vice President of the Foundation for the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. We are so excited to have Dr. Dana Rickman with us this morning. She is the President of the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education. Dana has been the Vice President before and took over the reins back in January of the partnership. And so we are so excited to continue working with Dana under her leadership in the partnership. If you're not familiar with the top 10 issues, this is a report that GPEE produces every year. It's something that's used by key legislators, by stakeholders. It's a great report, has so much great information. And so we're really excited to have Dana go through kind of some key things to take away from the top 10 and to Amy's point, go through other data points and kind of learn what we can glean from Dana about the future of K-12. So with that, Dana, I'll let you transition over to your slides.
All right. There we go. How's that? Can everybody see that?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everybody. And thank you, Daniela and Amy and Joy and all of you for having me here this morning. Thrilled to spend my Friday morning talking about education policy. And I actually mean that, not sarcastically. As was mentioned, this is the top 10 issues to watch in 2021. For those of you, I think most of you on the webinar are familiar with the Georgia Partnership, but just in case you're not, we are a nonpartisan advocacy organization that was actually created out of a partnership between the Georgia Chamber of Commerce and the Georgia Economic Developers Association way back in 1992. And at that time, it was felt, frankly, by the business community that the public education system in Georgia was not producing a high enough quality workforce from which they could draw their employees. But the business community did not know how to engage in the discussion, how to partner, how to advocate for the changes that they needed. And so the partnership was created to be that voice. I tend to start out all of my talks and presentations with that story so people understand that I think everybody can agree there are many, many reasons for a high quality public education system within a state. The partnership tends to come at it through the lens of a strong workforce development, workforce pipeline because of who we are and our founding and our board and all of these sorts of things. And as was mentioned, this is our top 10 issues to watch. It's an annual publication that we do, and I think this is like our 15th or 16th edition, but the top 10 takes really a deep dive into some of the issues that we feel either are hot and people are talking about, either in legislation or in what's going on across the education ecosystem, or issues that we feel people should be talking about but aren't, and try to raise them up and really think about what's going to be good for children and families and long-term economic development. And so this year's edition, 2021, I'm going to sort of dive right in and give a little context. As everybody knows, the pandemic has really upended education systems and sort of plunged Georgia into another economic downturn that is perhaps not as bad as we had feared, but it's still impacting, and we don't know what that long-term recovery is going to look like. And so as Georgia moves from response to recovery and ultimately success, we felt it was important to take a step back and consider longer term imperatives that we could create a better system for all. For those of you familiar with our work, you'll know that last year's top 10 issues to watch, which came out obviously right before the pandemic, really focused on what we felt was a pending educational and economic development crisis that had been highlighted by some research conducted by SREB, which is the Southern Regional Education Board. At that time, pre-pandemic, SREB had concluded that due to the impact of automation and changing economy, and coupled with the current education level of our state's population, Georgia was in danger of seeing 1.5 million of its workers and its children be unemployed or underemployed in low-wage jobs by 2030. Since then, COVID-19 has induced shutdowns, accelerated these economic trends, especially in mechanization and automation, and really accelerated this workforce demand crisis. And recent research done, sort of updated research by SREB, is now estimating that 2 million Georgia workers, which is about 45% of our current workforce, are really at risk for unemployment, reduced work hours, or exiting the labor force altogether by 2025. And if that sounds far away, let me remind you, it's currently 2021, which I need a reminder of that all the time because I get lost in time these days. So for us at the Georgia Partnership, the education system, it's really the key to recovery in Georgia and across the entire United States. And so, the amount of suffering caused by poverty, disenfranchisement, racial and social injustices, it's staggering right now. But if we think about education and educated citizenry, that is the key to long-term solutions to these problems that we're facing, and ensuring that everybody has equal access to these kinds of opportunities. And I think the pandemic has really provided this opportunity to implement true education reform by addressing some historic structures and removing barriers that have kept many Georgians, especially low-income Georgians, people of color, from fully participating in the economic prosperity that the state has, until very recently been experiencing. And it's, anticipated that we will return to the economic prosperity that we've known. And so that's sort of the background of our top 10 this year. Whoa, apologies. And so these are the 10 issues that we really dive into. And fear not, I'm not going to go into all 10 in detail. We'll be here all morning, but just give you a couple of highlights. And then Danielle had asked me to dive into about 3 of them, and then we can open it up for a broader discussions. But what we did with the top 10 issues this year is really applied sort of a social justice equity lens across the entire birth to work pipeline to highlight where the pandemic really revealed where we have strong foundations to build, but also cracks that were exposed and exacerbated by these systemic barriers to access and achievement that need to be addressed across all of these issues. Obviously, the first one is equity. Of utmost importance, I think, moving forward for long-term recovery is the ability to successfully address needs of students and families and this persistent achievement disparities that we see across income levels and between white students and students of color. If we've noticed in the pandemic and the subsequent economic turmoil expose many of these systemic structural barriers that have historically been preventing many Georgians from fully participating in our economic growth. And we've seen disproportionate impacts on unemployment rates, on earnings. People of color have been and continue to be more likely to contract COVID, less likely to have health insurance, more likely to report food insecurity, all of the things. And that impacts education system, that impacts our workforce. And these impacts on people of color in particular, and those with lower levels of educational attainment, these aren't an accident, right? Generations of national and state public policy decisions have really institutionalized structural barriers for decades. And so our path from recovery to success, we really must consider a new normal that really revolutionizes the role of education, how instruction is delivered, and the role the entire education system plays in economic recovery and development. And you'll hear me talk about that a lot, is the need to really link education policy with economic development policy. Second issue, funding. Obviously, schools are facing dramatic increases in cost. State revenues are down. And so, what adequate funding levels do we really need? Early learning, I think it further this past year has further accentuated some of the issues around early learning, including its role in supporting a statewide workforce. I don't know if many of you, I'm sure many of you in the audience, like myself, have been parenting kids at home while you're trying to work. And that has affected my work. And so, access around quality and all of these sorts of things. Delivery of instruction, we really we tried to turn that on its head and really think about, for the past year, teachers and families have had to come up with new ways to reach children and figure out how to teach them where they are. And so are there new innovative ways that we can learn about delivery of instruction to a diverse population as a means to improve equity, and think about new ideas to really help get students the knowledge that they need and how they learn and how they receive. Teachers, that's one I'm going to dive into a little bit more in a minute. Accountability and assessments, I think now is the time for state leaders and district leaders too, to consider how to drive more equitable student achievement over the short, medium, and long term, and the role accountability and assessments play in that. They're the key to understanding which new schooling arrangements are working, how best to identify needs and offer supports. I think we need to really rethink all of that. Parent engagement, I think, over the past year, parents have been engaged in their students' education like never before. And so and they have certainly a new understanding, or I do myself, about what's going on in their students' classroom, what they're learning, their teacher's approach to learning. How do we capitalize on that and really have true parent authentic engagement in the learning process? Post-secondary completion, that has always been an issue. How do we get more students into post-secondary and also critically completing post-secondary, and not just students that are currently in the K-12 pipeline, but how do we re-engage our adult population that needs to be reskilled, upskilled, finish high school, finish their post-secondary credentials. And so it's very important not to leave out the adult population in these education discussions. Georgia's workforce pipeline, I'm going to dig into that one in just a moment. And then reinventing education, that's the third one that I'm going to briefly dig into. And then we can open up for questions. So Daniela asked me to go into this one a little bit because I think, we always talk about the education system and whatnot, but we very rarely in groups like this really get into the meat of the teachers. And first, let me just give a shout out to teachers. I can't imagine what they have gone through over the past year and their ability to really bring it, for lack of a better word, and to educate students. And they have been doing so over the past year under incredibly different circumstances. So first, just as a personal shout out to the teachers, yay. But looking at teachers, this issue in particular, the impact of the pandemic, unprecedented strains on the educational systems and really unprecedented strains on teachers directly. And, teachers across the country are really asking themselves, how do I keep doing this? And there's so much uncertainty over the future of education, and really created a lot of questions around the teaching workforce and the teaching pipeline. And for the immediate future, we don't know yet sort of the implications of what will this do for teachers considering staying in the profession, or new teachers wanting to go into the profession? And so lots of questions yet to be asked, like how many will be leaving the profession altogether? We've seen some drop off over the past year, but most teachers have sort of decided to stick it out this year. There are concerns that next year we'll see an even greater drop of teachers leaving the profession due to the stresses related to this. The questions around mental health needs of students, but also the trauma of the educators in the classroom as well. How are we dealing with that? How are we supporting that? And, in the long term, how many students entering college today 2 years ago really wanted to be a teacher, but no longer do, right? They've changed their mind because they're like, that's just too chaotic. I can't do that. And thinking about, this disruption and additional responsibility put on educators related to that, what does that mean for the long-term attractiveness of teaching teaching as a career? And so there's a couple main points I wanted to bring out that we talk about in the 10. Some of the challenges. One, we talk about challenges to professionalism. The teaching is a profession. It is on the level of lawyer, banker, accountant. It requires, high degrees of education and all of these sorts of things. And, due to even before the pandemic, but especially pandemic related stresses, there is a declining morale and increased, likelihood of people resigning from the profession. And especially now that there's new staffing needs, and people like myself are really talking about all the reforms that we need to do in education, and everything from, we need to weave in socio-emotional skills and academic instruction. How do we instruct the most vulnerable students, maximizing effectiveness of engagement, pivoting to online learning, new kind of professional learning communities, analyzing curriculum and there's so much change going on right now, and all of it could be very good and very powerful. But there is a sense, I think, generally speaking, amongst the teaching core, that these discussions, these reforms, these ideas are being done to teachers instead of with them. And so I think it's critically important that as we talk about differentiating instruction and all of these things, nobody knows better how to reach a student than the teacher. And nobody knows better how to lead a classroom than the teacher. And so we need to make sure that they are actually, if not in the discussions, at a minimum, actually leading these discussions with ideas and reform ideas, and make sure they're part of the process of the solution. Also, challenges to the pipeline, meaning, next generation of teachers, how many people are coming in. And again, pre-pandemic, Georgia was already facing teacher shortages, and especially key areas of, STEM, the math, the sciences, and grades 6 through 12, special education teachers across all grade levels, and then especially hard to staff areas like rural and really low-income inner city schools. And overall, the number of teacher vacancies has been rising steadily between like 2015 and 2019, which is the most recent data. But, again, back to this equity question, these shortages are not distributed evenly across the state. And so we see low-income students and students of color in particular, and students who attend high poverty schools are significantly more likely to see an inexperienced teacher or an out-of-field teacher in their classroom, and a lot more churn and rotation in their teachers in their schools than their affluent counterparts. And so sort of thinking about how do we get a lot more experience and stability to the students who need it most should be of high priority. So what can we do? Some of the recommendations. Here's a list of sort of different policy solutions. And generally speaking, we know that teacher retention is crucial to reducing the shortages of especially teachers of color. Our teaching core does not look like our student body. A majority of students in the public education system in Georgia are minority students, and a majority of our teachers, something like 70 to 80% of them, are white. And research has also shown that if a minority student has a teacher just 1 year in their entire K-12 career that looks like them, is of their race, they have significant gains in terms of likelihood of graduating high school, in terms of their learning. And so it's very important that we get a more diverse teaching workforce. And there are some recruitment and retention efforts that can really foster that. And there's a list of them here, and we go into, but I want to highlight a couple of things that Georgia is doing in particular that show promise and we're pretty good at. And one is the Grow Your Own. You see that in the top right corner there. The Grow Your Own programs really are a good key to address the lack of diversity in the teacher pipeline. Nationwide, they take different forms, but generally they are local or regional efforts that seek to recruit residents from the community and build a workforce that reflects the ethnicity and background of the student population. And they typically involve partnerships between a school district and institutions of higher education, both universities and community or technical colleges. Georgia has really worked hard on developing a couple of robust Grow Your Own programs through either dual enrollment, career pathways, or our P20 regional collaboratives, which we can talk about more in the Q&A. One example of Georgia that's working really well is called RISE, Realizing Inspiring Successful Educators. And it was a program established in 2017 at the University of North Georgia, designed to prepare Spanish-speaking Latino students for careers in education. Through a partnership between UNG and Hall County School System, native Spanish-speaking individuals who enroll in UNG's teacher preparation program have their tuition paid by the local school system, work as paraprofessionals with English learning students in the Hall County elementary schools, and upon graduating, UNG students receive a job offer from Hall County schools. So it's a win for everybody. Sort of on the legislative front, many of you may have heard that Governor Kemp had a teacher pipeline legislative package designed to recruit, prepare, mentor, and retain the best educators in Georgia. And a lot of those were passed this past legislative session, and it did things like allowing retirees to return to work full-time in special areas of teaching, special areas of need, easier for veterans to become teachers, promote partnerships with HBCUs to really recruit more Black college students, things of that nature. And so it's a good, I think, framework and first step to really thinking about this problem in specific ways. We had House Bill 32 pass and sign into law, which creates a $3,000 tax credit for teachers going to work in specified rural or low performing schools. It can be awarded to veteran or new teachers who begin working for schools identified as, qualified for this. And so, an effort to get more teachers where they're needed. Let's see, our next, this one issue I thought you all would be particularly interested in, Georgia's workforce pipeline, equitable access to opportunity. And here you see some data about the skills gap that I think everyone on this call knows that we have. Again, citing SREB's research is that, we're in for a significant gap in economic development problem by 2025. And I know Amy, the Metro Chamber, has been looking at this for a while with the Your Talent, Your Future reports, and it all kind of says the same thing, where we have a lot of jobs available. We have a lot of people looking for jobs, but those skills and those credential levels really are not matching up to meet anybody's needs. And so to remain sort of responsive in this ever-changing workforce demand, especially as the workforce demands are changing at an accelerated pace, we need to think about how are we preparing our citizens for good jobs, right? How do we support career education and clear pathways for college preparation? And how do we provide equitable access to the skills, training, and continued professional development over a person's lifetime to keep engaging in the economy and the workforce? And so a couple specific examples. One, the connection of earnings and learnings, which is something I know the Georgia Chamber's Smart Decision Coalition has been working on, as well as people at the Metro Chamber. To make fully informed decisions, students and their parents and even adults in the workforce thinking about going back to school, we need really clear information before enrollment and then at progress checks during program enrollment about the estimated economic return on their investment of time, effort, and money, sort of aligned with the aptitude that the student has and what type of job that would actually lead to, or if they have a job in mind, what are the types of classes and programs that they really need to be taking. Also, aligning degrees with demand, which seems kind of obvious, but you're really talking about aligning two systems. You're talking about aligning the education system and then the workforce economic development system, which varies, right, by region, depending on, the needs by region change. So as students and job seekers sort of navigate the career planning journey, we need a broader understanding of the value of the regional and state labor markets placed on different credentials. For example, an national organization called ExcelinEd has a platform called Credentials Matter, and it examines how industry credentials address the skills gap and create pathways to career. And it's a website, and we could put it in the chat, but it says that, Georgia ranks as low alignment on high school students earning credentials that align with regional and state workforce demands. And they say of the more than 43,000 CTAE, career tech and ag education CTAE credentials earned in the 2018-2019 school year, only 16% were aligned with workforce demand, immediate workforce demand. That is very much a low alignment. Though I will say that there are entities in Georgia that are working hard to correct this, right? Georgia DOE is helping districts really examine and align program offerings to meet the needs of regional economies. You guys, I'm sure, have heard about some really great high quality work-based learning experiences, experiential learning experiential learning experiences, excuse me. And so there's a lot of good work going on in buckets across the state that we could highlight. We need a unified plan that brings all of this great work together so that everybody can take advantage of it. Also, an issue of Georgia that we really need to address, we started to address, but need to do more work on, the transfer and applicability of credit, right? It's a significant concern because more and more students really modify their post-secondary plans and go, take some courses, go to a 2-year college, 4-year college, all kinds of things. And currently there's about 28 courses that are cross-listed between TCSG and USG in articulation agreements to try and sort of keep that streamlined transitioning going. But there's also dozens and dozens of different articulation agreements based on local industry demand and input between TCSG and some USG. And so there's it's a patchwork of work going on that I think we can align and strengthen. And then reskilling and upskilling the workforce. I mentioned this before that we really can't leave out the adult learners. Lifelong learning is going to require, we're going to be requiring job changes, and we need to be able to quickly upskill and remain competitive. And you're adding credentials, stackable credentials, things like this to add value in the job market. And so we need to rethink our education system. When we think about education, it's not just, oh, you have your high school diploma, we're done, or high school diploma, post-secondary diploma, we're done. It's not linear. There's no endpoint. You get your credential, you enter the workforce, you work for a while, the economy shifts and changes, you go back, adjust, enter the economy. And so it's a continuous cycle, not a linear line. And so we need to think differently about education policy in that way and really adjust our policies. And so for me, if there's a, sort of a silver lining to this economic disruption, really manifested in we're having more discussions around how to provide inclusive opportunities for everybody and improved access to the employment opportunities. And again, these aligning programs with earnings and regional demand, integrating workforce development into, dual enrollment coursework, cost-effective way to minimize college expenses and graduate career-focused student. And so we really need to double down on regional business collaborations to guide the work of high school career education and post-secondary career education and support both work-based learning opportunities and career pathways. And if nothing else, the pandemic has exposed that workers who don't have transferable skills are the ones who are going to get behind and be in trouble. Career ladders in many technology-based middle skill jobs require this constant learning or on or off the job to catch up in technology changes. And my last little bit here is issue 10. And for me and in the work of the partnership, this is sort of the crux of what we do, this sort of state level policy. As we move into 2021, or now that we're into it, now Q2 has already started, the question remains, how do we move from response to recovery to ultimately success, right? Tremendous amount of pressures for school to reopen back in the fall of 2020 and still is to reopen for in-person learning. Because I think everybody recognizes that schools are really the foundation that needs to be in place for the economy and the rest of society to begin to recover and return to quote normal. But the recovery of schools, however, is really linked to the support of other government-led and private-led and economic sectors like health and safety and social service and all these other things. And schools themselves require the involvement of private, nonprofit sector, business and industry partnerships, community-based leaders, faith organizations, coordinating across state, local, and regional levels. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to pull this together. And you throw in the fact that Georgia is a local control state, right? And so when schools were trying to figure out how to reopen in the fall safely, either virtually or in person, they got a ton of guidance and suggestions from state agencies, Georgia DOE, Department of Public Health, national organizations, local organizations, everybody giving them advice and guidance, but there was no clear directive of here are the things you must do. To be clear, nobody knew what they must do, but certainly individual superintendents across the state really didn't know. And the only thing that was required of them when they opened was any kind of reporting requirements if one of their students or staff got COVID. How to report that to the Department of Public Health. Otherwise, schools were pretty much free to sort of figure it out themselves and then ask for help. But in this process, schools were not only struggling with how to safely educate their students, right? The shutdown and the economic crisis, as we've mentioned, really exposed and exacerbated a lot of these opportunity gaps that existed. One of the most critical and continues to be the uneven access to virtual devices and internet, both of which, again, critical to learning online and frankly, everything else in society. And so the digital divide had made it essentially impossible for some students to learn during the pandemic. And that also impacts schools' ability to innovate with different instructional delivery models, in continuous learning environments, all of these sorts of things. So how do we move forward on this? And I'm going to sum up here real quick. To move from recovery to long-term success, schools are being asked to rethink and reinvent education. And this is a heavy, heavy lift, right? Reinventing schools, if you think about it, really involves revisiting all the things we're talking about here. How teachers are educated. What's a robust professional development model? Fixing the statewide broadband access issues, strengthening alignments between education and early learning systems, K-12 systems, post-secondary, but then connecting those to local, regional, and state workforce pathways. So we're talking about whole system redesigns, and then we also need a commensurate funding strategy and to make this happen. And so this requires some focused state level leadership. And so to do that, from the state, I think we need a really strong statewide policy agenda that really emphasizes some of the things that we have up here on the slide, thinking about the whole child, right? Both their physical and mental health, as well as education, elevating the teacher pipeline, as we've discussed. The big one, really reversing or addressing and reversing and ameliorating the impacts of poverty and discrimination. And finally, one that I think will help the state as a whole and is essential is coordinating, again, education policy with economic development policy. And so finally, we have some suggestions about how to do that. I don't know if you can even read this on the screen, but it's in the book, so you can dig in. But again, our friends at SREB really recommend, to begin with at a state policy level, and you could even try this at a local regional level, is intentional alignment, thinking about the three main state plans that fall under federal statute, right? Perkins 5, which is the Strengthening Career and Technical Education Act. WIOA, your Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, right? So you have your workforce, you have your job training, and you have your K-12 statutes that all have, goals and, ambitions and stuff. So how do we align those? And they all have funding streams that can overlap and be leveraged with each other. And so, Perkins 5 and WIOA, we're finalizing those plans, are getting close to now. We can, do edits to ESSA when we need to. And so, the goals around reinventing education are beyond any one system or local district's ability to really do. There certainly continues to be a vital role for local control in decisions, particularly around coordinating through schools in the community around local needs and setting local priorities. But I think local control can really flourish the best. Teacher delivery models, summer summer programs, certainly workforce pathways, priorities tied to regional goals, recruitment strategies, but all of that can operate better within a strong policy framework that figures out, how to share and leverage ideas. And so I think that's where we are in Georgia and what we need to do to really move forward. And with that, I'll be quiet and let you all ask some questions. I'm happy to have a discussion.
Thanks so much, Dana. And I want to echo the comments in the chat too. Just really appreciative of everything that GPE's done, everything that y'all's top 10 focuses on. I know it is a lot of work, but we all appreciate the end result. So I'm so grateful for that. We got a great question from Tim around funding that I wanted to talk about. And I know that was part of y'all's top 10 too. So Tim said, to what extent does the funding formula that Georgia uses, help or hurt equity and the needs of underserved students? So thanks, Tim, for that one.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Our funding formula. The funding formula, it's funny. It needs to be updated. It's a very complicated algorithm, but it was designed and implemented back, I think it's like at least 20 years old. And so it doesn't account for things like internet. It still talks about libraries instead of media centers. It reimburses substitute teachers at like $12 a day. It's like 1985 assumptions about what goes into school. So we certainly need to update the formula. There are some good things about overall funding where we do have special grants in the state outside of the formula. So we have low wealth and sparsity supplements that we give districts that, to help equalize what's in the formula. And so if you look at, national research has sort of compared Georgia's funding levels to others. And what's interesting about it is that we tend to get really good marks in terms of equity because of these other grants that we add in, like the low wealth districts and the sparsity grants to help sort of equalize. But we tend to get very low marks on just overall like adequacy, overall funding. Like we're sort of upper 30s, low 40s in terms of if you rank everybody. And so we tend to get A's on equity and D's around if you're grading these things on the overall amount of state funding. And so what that says is that we equitably underfund everybody in terms of what needs to be done. And so I'm not advocating that we just spend more money on education, because I don't think just randomly upping it. I say you have to be very smart and targeted and figure out how to do that. But where we get into equity problems is if we're adequately underfunding everybody from a state level, there are wealthier districts that can make up for that shortage through their own tax base, right? Versus the districts that just can't because they themselves are poor. And so you see massive inequities in reality when you put together the local and state funding. Having said that, I think one way to really think about redoing the funding formula, instead of just saying, oh, we just need to spend more money, there's a couple things. One, we're one of the few states that don't have any sort of poverty rate. And so we don't account for the amount of students living in poverty. We know they are more expensive to educate just because they have more needs. It's nothing to do with their cognitive abilities. There's a ton of really smart kids living in poverty, but they just cost more because they have more needs. So there's one, we need to think about a poverty rate in terms of how we distribute the money. But two, we've never done a cost study of how much it costs to get the outcomes that we're looking for. And I think, those of you on the call, obviously in business, if you're rolling out a new product, you want to know how much it costs to produce. You want to know how much is what is, if I'm going to, one of our former chairs was, head of Lockheed Martin. And they said, if we get an order for a new plane that they want to be invisible and, jet, whatever, we know how much that's going to cost to make the invisible jet. And if they're not going to pay us that money to do it, we have to figure out what we're going to prioritize, right? We've never done that in Georgia. And so I think to do a cost study of how much would it actually cost to get the outcomes we're looking for. And my guess is it's going to be some astronomically high number that we can't afford, which is okay. It gives us a goal, but it also gives us something to work for, saying, okay, if we cannot support what we're asking for, how do we prioritize for what we can support and have a real discussion about what we're willing to pay for, and have a true understanding of what we're going to get for it. And so it's really a return on investment. And so those are two things I think we need to do together, is think about like a poverty rate, but then also have some real understanding about what it costs to deliver what state policymakers, and frankly, all of us, are asking for from our school systems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that targeted approach really makes sense, because you're able to really prioritize what your goals are, what the needs are, and make sure that, to your point, you're really devoting resources in the most impactful places, which I think all of us
yeah, it's the same way you do your own family budget. Like, how much money you have coming in each month, and there's all kinds of things that I want to do, and that would be great if I could do, but like, no, I can't do this and this is what I'm going to prioritize first, and then when I get more money, or if I'm able to raise more revenue or whatever, I can add to that and get to my ultimate goal of the family vacation in Hawaii, or whatever it is I want to be doing.
I think we could all use a family vacation in Hawaii. Yeah, I'm on board with that one. We'll wait for some more questions to come into I've got one more. We've got one from Michael. How much of a barrier is local control to the goal of reinventing education in Georgia?
I wouldn't so much call it a barrier, because it's not like there's anyone at the local level who's saying they don't want to do it. Right. And so it's not like it's an obstacle internal. The thing is, though, is that, we have, was it like 183 different school districts with varying capacity to do stuff. And the things that we're really requiring, or that need to be done to, quote, reinvent education, it's not in their wheelhouse. And so they just physically can't, or logistically can't. So if you're talking about, blending economic development policy, health and safety policy, and education policy, like Decatur City School superintendent and school board can't do that, right? And so, we're really talking about, or if you're talking about, sharing best practices and, all kinds of stuff, it's just structurally, it just doesn't work that way. And so you really need sort of a higher level of, bringing the silos together and sort of a comprehensive, strategy and almost like guideposts around what you can do. And then at the local level, when they have sort of the right ultimate goal, sort of aligned with where, as a region and a state they want to go, then they're free to, at the local level, to really decide however it is they want to do to get there, either through, robust summer development programs, or really honing in on early learning, or, whatever their priorities are. And so it's not that it's a barrier in terms of we could do it if they just did something differently. It's just that you just can't do some of this stuff at the local level.
Right. I mean, I think that's kind of, it's why you have state, it's why you have local. The state can prioritize certain, things. And then, once that's kind of figured out, locals can use their expertise to really do well what they do well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And where the rubber meets the road, the implementation and how to get it done, and, all of these kinds of things. And so giving them the right tools and the right sort of playing field to then just let them go and let them just innovate and do great things.
Yeah, no, we love our local district leaders, and having a sister who's a teacher, I know she knows what's best for her kids in her classroom, and I am grateful for that, because I would not.
Right, which is why she needs to be involved in these discussions too, of like, well, so how best do we, do this individualized instruction, and not tell her, oh, we got this great model, train on that for a day and make magic happen, which I think a lot of teachers feel like that's what's happening, and it's not fair, and I don't blame them for being stressed out and upset.
No, absolutely. So I think, technology, broadband, all things that we know, have been an equity issue. I think, in rural areas as well as urban areas, have you had the devices? Have you had the laptops? Have you had to share it with all your, 3 siblings? Have you had access to broadband? Have you had to go to the library down the street to get, do your homework? But, what are y'all thinking, or what are y'all hearing about, education delivery models going forward? I think especially as we've been in this virtual thing for, over a year now, almost 2 different school years. What are y'all hearing about how this, would move forward? And of course, thinking about how this would, be implemented equitably so that, parents and families would still get good, high quality education.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one that I don't have a complete answer to, but I have some ideas. And this is where we need more, like, let the locals local control go crazy and try a bunch of different stuff and see what they come up with, for one, which is why we need good assessments to see what's working. But some of the things that, we've been hearing doing, and I think no one is advocating for, oh, if we get everybody online, we'll just have a big virtual thing and everyone will be fine. I think everybody recognizes, please don't misunderstand, but everybody recognizes that in person, face-to-face connection, all that other kind of stuff, like we need to keep that. But I think that there are ways now that as we've gotten better at online delivery and better at sort of training teachers and how to do it and how to, like, how can we think about online access to supplement the in-person experience in a way that helps equity. And the classic example is you have one physics teacher for all of Southwest Georgia, if that, right? And so those kind of, and just in terms of offering in access. But there's some really interesting things going on that districts are that I really want to keep track of around the learning pods. And when the learning pods first popped up, and frankly still, they are, I think, a big threat to equity, right? Because it's the families who are resourced and connected that are able to pull together, and hire a teacher or somebody to help their student. But there are a couple of school districts that are really turning that on its head and thinking about learning pods as a way to increase equity. And so, for example, Marietta City has partnered with, when they wanted to start bringing students back to in-person as safely as possible, they prioritize their highest need students. And so thinking about special ed students, English language learners, that K through 3 population, and partnered with every after school, out of school time partner they could find, local churches, Boys and Girls Club, YMCAs, or whatever. Use those connections. Again, they align their goals with the private sector, what they wanted to accomplish, use those connections to establish their own pods. And so this high priority group in Marietta City, Grant went around and set up groups of 6 to 8, across Marietta City, and got those kids in-person supervised access. Again, it was still virtual, but as a learning pod. And so moving forward, when we can be in person all the time, is there a way to think about that kind of model for kids that need extended learning time, or even access for kids, high performing kids that want special STEM instruction, or, AP, all kinds of different ways you could use that to supplement the regular day. And so there's things like that I think are really interesting. If we, again, think about aligning goals across the community, across the region, aligning different sort of curriculums and stuff, that we're all on the same page, that are really innovative, that we should take a look at, and not think about getting back to normal of just everybody in school 8 to 5 or whatever it was. I think there's some alternative teaching and learning delivery structures that can come out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And I think the opportunity to capitalize on the innovations that we've tried is something that's, extremely valuable. I know Georgia State University has done some of their learning pods too for freshmen that are coming in, especially first generation minority, and they've seen great success. So I think, there is research in other places that shows this could be an effective model to develop, mentors that are able to help you go through all this together so that you can really learn and collaborate and figure it out, which I think we all know are skills of the future that we need to continue to build in our students.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff on the post-secondary landscape that we can learn from, that especially the TCSG system, which is a little more nimble in being able to apply and thinking about, because they never really, for a lot of them, they had to stay in person anyway for a lot of these labs and the thing, and they figured out how to do it. Okay. And then on the funding side, I was talking to my USG friends, and that's a really antiquated funding formula. Like, we thought K-12 was antiquated. Apparently, some of part of the funding formula for USG systems is based on square footage. So it's, you get build a new dorm, build a new classroom, you get more money. And so now that we're pivoting to virtual, square footage isn't exactly going to be your make or break earned revenue source. And so we really need to rethink how we fund post-secondary as well as K-12. I didn't want to lose that point.
No, I think that's a great one too, and always appreciative of everything. I know Commissioner Dozier's been on with us before. It's been a while too, just to talk through all of the logistics that they work through to make sure that they're still able to provide really strong hands-on learning. And
Yes.
those folks were able to immediately go into the workforce, especially in a lot of essential areas that we had increased demand. So appreciative of Mark, and of course, Commissioner Dozier and TCSG as a whole.
TCSG just has kicked it out of the park. And I will say K-12 too. I think K-12, for years, everyone has always said that it is like reforms in K-12, like moving a large ship, like at a glacier speed, right? But I think that they proved last March that they can flip on a dime when they need to. And what they were able to do really quickly under very trying circumstances, I don't think they get enough credit, the educators and the teachers, for what they were able to, how they were able to pivot and accomplish and really think quickly about this delivery of instruction. And so I don't want to lose sight of that either. Like they just did miracles.
Absolutely. I think that, we all were trying to figure out how to function as normal humans, and appreciative of our teachers that were there to help us through it all. And, they were dealing with, of course, their families too, and still able to help us figure out how to keep educating kids, which is awesome. Well, I know, assessments is an area that's been in the news a lot going on, but we know there's been learning loss. We don't have a good idea of what that learning loss is, obviously equity issues there too. Certain kids have probably lost more knowledge than others, given to teachers, tutors, the learning pods, all those things. Are there kind of some tidbits that y'all had in the top 10 that would kind of give us a better idea of how to think about assessments as really, a data driving tool, thinking about dedicating resources? How can we think differently and maybe depoliticize something and really make gains for students that are needed?
Yeah. I think there's been a lot of discussion about, one, I think we need to clearly change the discussion and how we get into accountability and all that, but that, that assessments don't have to be evil, right? That they're, all of us, even, as adults, like, we're all being assessed all the time, whether it's a written thing or, it's just a thing to really keep tabs and figure out, again, how teachers know what students need. And broader than that, the idea around accountability, I think, one, we need to just call it something else, because it's been such, but I really believe in strong accountability for just not the sort of hammer of accountability of you're in trouble, I'm going to hit you with it. But the hammer of accountability is like, how can I help you build a house, with this hammer? And I think I get nervous when we say we're just not gonna, do end of year assessments, because, like, as a state, we just don't know who's doing what. And it's not about punishing, but it's about, we have limited resources. How do we prioritize where they need to go? Which set of students are struggling the most? Which districts are struggling the most? Which subjects are they struggling the most? And I know that there are a lot of districts who are sort of well-resourced and have pretty good capacity, that they are doing their own assessments, and some are sharing assessments and whatnot, and they're getting a pretty good picture of what's going on. But then there are other districts who aren't, not because they're bad districts, but they don't have the capacity to do it. Again, this is an equity problem. And so you have significant pockets of the state where you just don't know enough to even target the resources that they may need, because you don't know what they need, other than it looks like they need everything. And that's not an answer. And so thinking about how do we use assessments properly to help us at a state level really look across the state and say, who's struggling where and what do they need to address that issue, right? And then also, who's really, kicking it out of the park with, like, English language learners, or who's really hitting those, early learning numbers? What the heck are they doing? And can we replicate that somewhere? And so there's all kinds of great things that can come out of a really high quality assessment system and a really helpful, constructive accountability system. And so I think as a state, at the local and state level, we really need to have conversations about how can we use these to help build up systems and help support and identify opportunities, let's say, to invest and to make better. And certainly not to, I don't believe in accountability as a shaming system, or an, oh, you're a bad school. It's like, oh no, I I need help. And here are the resources that, we need to bring to bear to help this. And so again, it's about reasonable expectations, and it's about the cost of what are we asking districts to do, and are we giving them the appropriate resources to do it? And without good assessments and without good accountability, it's really difficult to answer that question in a sort of a systematic way across the state, a fair way across the state. And so I think that's where the discussion needs to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is something that every student in the state would benefit from, and I think our state leaders too would learn a lot along the process. Well, now we're getting close to time. Amy, I wanted to see if you had any other questions or closing thoughts, but just really appreciate, Dana, your time. I know we posted the link to the full top 10, so everyone read it this weekend. It's going to be great. We've got some rainy day weather tomorrow, so you got plenty of time to do it. No excuses.
It's a page turner.
Yeah, but Dana, just thank you so much. I really appreciate everything you do at NGPE as well.
Thank you.
Ditto. I couldn't totally agree. This is a wonderful topic, and I, like you, am excited by the topic, and so I'm grateful to the work that you guys do. And I love the kind of framing it. It is not about shaming. It is about where do you need help and how can we help you? Right. And so keeping that in mind across the board. And Daniela, thank you as always for putting Max Minutes together. You've done a fabulous job and couldn't do it without you. And I mean that. So with that, just thank you everybody for joining us. We really appreciate you listening in today. And we have our next Max Minutes coming up on May 7th, and that will kind of be our legislative debrief from the session. So we're working on a few more speakers, but right now we've got Cosby from the Georgia Chamber, as well as Marshall and Tim from the Metro Atlanta Chamber. I'll sit this one out, but I'll probably pipe in, but working on a couple more speakers, but it should be a good, robust discussion. I know that there's a lot to cover, not only just in education and workforce. So we'll be ready for you. So everybody, thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful weekend.
Have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.